recorded. Okay, so thank you. And we will just hang on there for our Spanish interpretation. Hopefully that will come right in. So, and then we'll begin next with any public comment. Anybody signed up to speak today?
No, can we just check the chat though, to make sure that no one signed up at the last minute?
All right.
You don't have access to the chat just yet.
I do not see anybody's.
All right. So we will then move along with item number 1, which is approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And a second. So there's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Then we will move right. Motion carries. So let's move right along to item number 2, which is briefing and possible action on proposed UDC amendments. And that should be presented by staff and by Jim Bailey. Is he present or?
Jim, I don't think is online just yet. He had a conflict and will be trying to join us later.
Okay, should we then take another item, or is the staff prepared to give a presentation?
Staff is prepared to present.
Okay.
You have to
Use my
all your
computer.
devices.
Here we go.
Jim Bailey is here, he just raised his hand.
Oh,
okay.
fabulous. Jim's here. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, Jim, you want to kick us off before we turn it over to staff?
Is he a panelist?
No.
Oh,
Can you make him a panelist, please?
And while we're, I think, just getting Jim lined up, so thank you to all the volunteers who served on the UDC Amendments Committee. And I know that it was very well attended and there was lots of feedback, so hopefully we'll get ourselves ready here for Jim to be unmuted.
Jim, you should now be a panelist. And
Okay,
able to...
I'm in. I was able to
Yay.
now mute myself. Let me
Okay.
start this video. I was here but silent, so I raised my hand to see if I could get someone's attention. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, thanks you all. As you'll recall, we started our committee work a couple of months back. We've been meeting pretty intensely over the last couple of months, primarily to review issues that were discussed over the period of a year or so with the original Removing Barriers Committee. Largely, this was recommendations around accessory dwelling units. We revisited those, put those out for public comment. I'm sure Rachel will go through some of that in a moment. But we also had another list of items that have been kicking around since the original Housing Commission. And we attempted to tackle some of those. It was a list of about a dozen items. Many of them were just too complex and are going to require further study and further community input. So what we're here with today to talk to you about is a fairly modest list of recommended UDC changes, pretty much everything that we could put together in the short amount of time we have. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Rachel and or Sarah to sort of walk through all of that. And then I'll be here to answer any questions or provide any context.
Great. Hey, thank you. And can somebody please list the name of the people that were on the committee just so that we can acknowledge them and thank them appropriately?
Yes. We do have that information. Can I get the memo with the names?
I don't have the packet in front of me, but I'm sorry. This is good.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all for your patience this morning. So as Chair was saying, we had a 9-member subcommittee here, co-chaired by Jim Bailey, who you just heard, and Jordan Gawi with the Beacon Hill Neighborhood Association. Pete Alanis, in his capacity as a housing commissioner and executive director of the San Antonio Housing Trust. Nikki Johnson, in her capacity as housing commissioner and community advocate. Michael Taylor with Cross Timber Homes. Taylor Allen with WGI Engineering and Consulting. Monique Chaboya with McCormick Brown Salazar. Melanie Coffin with Disability SA. And she's also a member of the Public Engagement and Outreach Subcommittee of the Housing Commission. And Jose Gonzalez III as a consultant with Alamo Community Group. And Jim, I saw you raise your hand. Did you want to intervene?
No, I'm just messing with the interface here. Sorry.
That's a lay of the land with WebEx here. So without further ado, we'll kind of jump in to the presentation here and get through these technical elements. So as you all recall, back in October, you established the Removing Barriers Subcommittee, and their charge in that short term was to bring forth amendments to the UDC, which are due to development services on February 1st. So we're here to present those to you, and I want to acknowledge Crystal Gonzalez and a few other staffers from DSD that are on the call with us today. Thank you for being here and for all the support that you've shown the subcommittee throughout this process. See Melissa Ramirez and Mike Shannon on as well. Thank you all. So after today's presentation, the committee is still going to be working. They'll be engaged very directly in the UDC amendment process with the DSD team, and also beginning some really critical conversations on other processes around affordable housing development. And the focus in particular is, how do we make sure we're offsetting the regulatory cost burden of affordable housing development and preservation in a way that accomplishes our dual goals of stewarding our tax dollars appropriately and making sure we're maximizing our affordable development and preservation opportunities. Next slide. So an important thing, and Jim touched on this, is that this is really building off of a lot of existing work. Removing Barriers started as an ad hoc working group established by the mayor, co-chaired by Jim, Steve Papoon, and Cynthia Spillman of Tier 1 Neighborhood Coalition. Their process has always been consensus-based, always been open to the public, and in fact, they met 27 times between August of 2019 and February 2020 when the work paused due to COVID-19. All of this previous work is posted online, and we can pop the link to it in the chat here. And their meetings will continue to be posted online, and all those documents continue to be posted to the public. Next slide, thank you. So today, they have proposed amendments for your consideration across 5 areas of the UDC. As Jim was saying, this work really focused on ADU amendments in particular, but there are a couple of areas. In total, they drafted 20 amendments to send forth for public consideration. Next slide. So they had their 4 meetings between November and December and conducted a public comment period through our SA Speak Up tool. We accepted comments through that tool and by phone and email as well. Rachel did a phenomenal job leading a public meeting on January 5th that was virtual and in person. As usual, we had our Spanish and ASL interpretation. We recorded and posted that meeting online, so you can watch it today if you would like. In total, we got 114 comments, and our log of comments will be available on the website as well. Next slide. So I'm going to go into some of the specifics of the UDC amendments that they're proposing. And the first batch of them, most of them, have to do with accessory dwelling units. So one thing that'll be key for you to know is that there are really 2 types. There's attached dwelling units, which you can see in this picture here are part of the primary structure, and detached, which are separate from. So we have kind of 3 batches of ADU amendments. Some of them apply to both types. Some of them apply to just detached accessory dwelling units, or sometimes you hear them called DADUs, and others apply only to attached dwelling units. So the first 5 are listed here on your screen. It's removing requirement that the utilities and electricals need to be connected to the primary structure. They can have their own connections. We're removing occupancy limitations. This is for 2 reasons. It's determined by other areas of the code, but it's also would allow people to have multiple bedrooms or multiple people living in an ADU if that's what fit their living situation. We're also allowing for greater flexibility in size. So the amendment related to this would be that you can have an ADU greater than 80 square feet, but it does need to be relative to the gross floor area of the primary structure. They're also removing a minimum size. So this would create a situation where if somebody wanted to build an apartment for an aging parent who perhaps doesn't need a full kitchen and doesn't need a full 800 square feet, they would be able to do that under this amendment. And lastly, 2 more on this one. They would be restricting the height or clarifying that it can't be more than 2 stories or 25 feet. And when we're talking about floor area in context of ADUs, we just want to clarify that we're talking about gross floor area. Next slide. So this next batch only applies to detached accessory dwelling units. We'd be removing architectural design requirements. And what we mean by that is if someone wanted to purchase like a kit ADU home, something that maybe is more sustainably developed, they could do that. It doesn't necessarily need to match to a T the primary structure. We'd be removing floor area limitations on detached accessory dwelling units, again, knowing that minimum size is already determined elsewhere in the building code. Removing the bedroom limit of 1, so more people could live in a detached unit. Again, overcrowding already prohibited elsewhere in the code. And clarifying that detached ADUs are permitted only in a rear yard, but knowing that if a homeowner doesn't have a rear yard, they could apply for a variance to place it elsewhere and work with development services on that process. We'd be removing a parking location requirement for ADUs that are under 800 square feet and clarifying that if they're over 800 square feet, they would need to have a parking space, but that can be in a configuration of the homeowner's choosing. So it doesn't need to necessarily be creating an additional space for parking. Can use an existing driveway. And then lastly, changing the setback requirements to be consistent with other accessory structures so that depending on how the roof and awnings work, they could be a little bit closer to the property lines. Next slide. This last batch related to ADUs applies only to attached units, which again, removing the floor area limitations to align with the other recommendations on ADU size and removing the occupancy limitation, again, not going against other portions of the code that limit overcrowding. Next slide. So we have 3 other amendments related to other areas of the code, and these really start to get at that regulatory cost burden piece that we were talking about earlier. The first has to do with parkland, and right now, affordable developments have to provide, of a certain size, have to provide a certain dedication of open space or parks, and the group proposed that affordable developments could use an alternate method to determine exactly how much. So you have an example here in your slides. That infill development, that is close to a park would not be required necessarily to include parkland and would not have to pay in lieu fees as well. However, if it were a larger structure that was further from a public park, then it would still dedicate parkland and could calculate that in a slightly different way. Tree preservation. Right now, developments, if there are trees in the right-of-way, those haven't been counting towards the overall canopy of the property. And we want to make an amendment to that for affordable developments only. So an example of this in practice would be that if there are 5 trees in the right-of-way, just right along the street there, they could preserve those trees and count those towards their canopy instead of removing them. Next slide. Lastly, street curbs and pavement construction. This is another of the batch that had been kind of coming out of that previous Housing Commission work Jim mentioned. And this would apply to affordable infill development. So things like when they do construction that would involve street repairs, they're not necessarily having to do it for the entire block, just for the area that's directly closer to the development. Larger developments would have to improve a larger area. Next slide.
Can we pause real quick?
Yeah.
So people are having trouble logging on, so.
Okay.
Can we get the link sent to
Yeah.
Ian and Monica as well?
We're gonna take just a 2-minute break and see if we can get the link out to folks. It sounds like some folks are having trouble logging in. Thank y'all for being patient with us.
That's good, because I was having trouble logging in myself.
Okay, unmuted.
Okay, I'm doing an audio check now. I think everybody who was having link issues should be in now. I'm hoping everybody can hear.
Unclear.
Can I get a thumbs up or verbal acknowledgement?
Can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Erica. All right, gang, thanks for your patience. I know that it was tough moving this to an all virtual meeting, and appreciate the team that's working really hard to make sure that the tech works. So if there are members of the public who you are aware of or are trying to access the meeting and can't, please pop it in the chat, work with the team, and we'll make sure everybody gets in. And again, this meeting has been recorded from the start, so we'll make sure it gets posted online. And as always, we're happy to answer questions about the content as well. Chair, would you like us to just continue with the presentation?
Yeah, please continue. I have some questions, but I'll let you finish, and then I'm sure some others have questions as well. So go ahead and continue with
Great. Okay, so next slide, please, Allison. Thank you. So if you've been watching closely, you might have counted only 16 amendments proposed to move forward, and we sent 20 for public consideration. As a result of the public comment, there were 4 that we're not recommending to move forward and are tabling for further discussion among the committee. And those are the ones that you see listed here. So the reason for this, for these first 2, is in response specifically to public comment on the survey. Folks were not supportive of these 2 items. And the second 2 just have a lot more discussion with staff in terms of what they would actually look like if they were implemented. So the committee is going to take these up and continue working on these. If necessary, we can explore other ways to work them into code or different ordinances. Next slide. So here's your timeline. Beginning with today, you have your briefing. The deadline for submission of these amendments is February 1st. So Rachel has dutifully compiled them to send them over to Mike and Melissa's team. Beginning in April through September, DSD will oversee the UDC amendment process, and the subcommittee will continue to engage in that, answering questions that the PTAC, who makes these decisions, have. We're expecting council approval sometime in October. After that, the DSD team will be doing a lot of public engagement to make sure folks understand the UDC amendments. You heard from Mike about that back in November. And in January, those UDC changes will go into effect. Next slide. So our recommendation as staff to you commissioners is to approve those 16 amendments that the subcommittee advanced forward. And staff will take care of submitting those by February 1st. We have suggested motion language here for you on the screen. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of questions kind of come to mind that may have been addressed in the ones that you were saying are not going to move forward. So can you go back to the ones that you're saying are not going to move forward?
Sure.
So that's what's not moving forward is special reconstruction standards. So can you just elaborate on what that means? I don't know if that's Mike or Jen to address.
Madam Chair, if I could interrupt real quick. I think there's still 1 or 2 folks trying to get on. I sent a little message over to Rachel and to Sarah, letting them know who was trying to get on, but I think there's still folks having stuff.
Okay.
Can you share the PowerPoint then?
You're on mute, Sarah, if you're trying to talk.
Sarah, are you trying to speak? We can't hear you. Okay, you're not.
Y'all are doing great. Hang in there.
We're almost ready, or should I play some music for us?
It looks like Justice Breyer is retiring.
I heard that. This is Jimmy.
Current
So of course
events.
that excited me.
Someone put a message in the chat box.
Que mi gente quiere son las cosas que siempre para brindar y un trato para los dos que vienen contigo. Los que no me subían a internet patilando de amigos. Ahora que nos ponen la alfombrita roja vienen conmigo.
Did y'all see the Spanish message?
Maria, we also made you a panelist, so if you need to speak, you can. And I see Tiana as well.
Good morning. This is Maria, my interpreter.
Okay, great.
I
Thank you.
apologize. Apparently there was a mistake with the links that they had sent us, so we're just joining. But please, if you can let everybody know that this meeting is also being interpreted and therefore recorded into Spanish.
Spreadsheet that has the intent.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be in the Spanish channel. If you need to communicate with us, please do it through the chat. Thank you.
Lo que María mencionó es que también estamos traduciendo esta reunión en español. En el chat está la información si necesitan entrar a la reunión en español, y esa sesión también está siendo grabada. Si necesitan escuchar la reunión en español, María es la intérprete. Por favor, acompáñenos y disculpas por la interrupción. Gracias.
If staff wouldn't mind putting the updated link into the chat, and that way the folks who are reaching out to us like individuals saying, hey, we can't get in, we can send them the updated link. Maybe that's the best way to do it.
The
All
Spanish.
right.
Okay, Rachel's going to go ahead and do that.
And in Spanish language as well. So.
The Spanish link is in the chat already, but we'll add the
Okay.
other.
Great. Are we prepared? Okay, let's try this again. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. It's been a rough week on all sides. So so I had a question in particular about the special reconstruction standards I know that it's recommended to not move forward. So you know what, maybe we don't need to talk about things that are not moving forward. Now that I think about it, so that's not moving forward. So, and the tree ordinance part is also not moving forward, or what? Can you expand on the tree ordinance piece?
A portion of it is, and Rachel has been in the day out, so I'll lean on her for some of this too. But the part of it that is moving forward is that trees that are in the right of way for an affordable housing development would be allowed to stay there, and they would count towards the canopy coverage for the whole property. The part that is not moving forward is that they would not be able to include trees outside of the minimum zoning setback area. So they would still have to follow the tree preservation ordinance as is.
Can you give me an example? 'Cause I'm not following you very well. So,
For which one?
so for the tree ordinance piece. So if a tree needs to come down in order to add the ADU, then they should be required to put one somewhere else on the property. That would have been under the normal situation, right?
Or provide.
Or
they
pay
can- Yeah.
pay in lieu. Okay, and so what is different about
So
this?
what was being proposed was that for an affordable housing development, if they were to remove a tree, they wouldn't have to pay into the mitigation fund. And since that receives very little public support, I think it was 48%, we decided not to move forward and to have further discussions on what the best option going forward should be.
Oh, okay, so not off the table, but still, okay, further discussion.
Councilwoman, excuse me, Shirley.
Yeah, I'm
Chair.
sorry, okay, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
A little further context. So I do think that there is a path forward for this. You know, especially if we're talking about infill conditions, you know, doing affordable housing in existing neighborhood patterns and so forth, right? There's historic development patterns that sort of define where buildings are on a lot. You know, we've got vacant lots in places where trees have grown up over time, where there probably should be a house or a building to, you know, fill in a missing tooth in a street and other situations like that. You know, the goal wasn't to provide a blanket ability to just sort of knock down any trees you want within the sort of buildable area of the site, right? It's about a targeted approach to doing good urban design. That in conjunction with allowing trees to be counted that are in the street where they should be, providing shade for pedestrians, reducing the urban heat island effect, and allowing for photovoltaic systems on roofs to work would be great. But there are ways that it could be abused with loose language. So we're going to need to sit down and work with the experts and work with development services to do some case studies and think about language that would allow us to have the public comfortable with moving forward with something like that. We just don't have time right now.
Okay. So let me give you an example, and I don't know this maybe for Mike or Melissa, but so I'll give you an example of something that happened in the district, you know, maybe a year or so ago. A developer wanted to move forward. There were two empty lots next to each other, and this developer wanted to do infill, and he wanted to do 2 structures on each lot, or maybe 3 structures on each lot. And the community didn't want that. They said, you know, they're zoned single family, or they did have the proper zoning, but they didn't support having 2 structures and really just wanted 1 structure. So I was talking to the community. I said, I think as right, he can build a structure and an ADU. And so perhaps it's better to have a full, you know, 3-bedroom house, 2 3-bedroom houses versus 1 3-bedroom house and then an ADU. So I guess, is that still the same scenario? So as right, they could currently build a house and an ADU, but not necessarily 2 houses on 1 single family lot.
That's right. I mean, it's all about the underlying zoning, the base zoning. So what we're proposing to do here today is to make it easier to build an accessory dwelling unit, and one that's really robust, right? That's big enough that a family can kind of live in it. It's still going to be smaller, than the main structure, probably. In most cases, it will be, although we've got some, really small houses on the west side, some of which may be smaller than an ADU we want to put in. But what you were describing was a form of as of right zoning, right? Where you have a base zoning district that only allows for a single home on the lot. So we've got a lot of things we need to work through with that. We're hoping that over the next year or two, our committee, working with the community and other advocacy groups, can begin to talk about density bonus and talk about something like an as of right zoning, but it's very complex, potentially really open to abuse. And so we're just going to have to move forward very cautiously with those discussions. But yes, as it stands right now, all we're proposing to do is to make it easier to build a more robust accessory dwelling unit on that lot you described, not another house right beside it.
Okay. And I guess just the last question before I turn it over to any of my other commissioners. The ADUs or the UDC amendments would still have to go through a zoning in some situations, or when would it not have to go through a zoning change?
And I may rely on Mike or Crystal to talk a little more about this, or somebody else from Development Services. But the goal is to make it, in a sense, as of right for single family zone districts, right? I mean, any single family zone district where you can have a single family house, you can put in an accessory dwelling unit without a zoning change. And you currently can. This just increases the quality of and potentially the size of accessory dwelling and usability of the accessory dwelling and unit, and remove some of the barriers for putting it in place.
Okay. All right. Well, let me. I don't see. Maybe somebody can see who has questions.
Kristen Dava.
Kristen. Okay, Kristen, go ahead, and then we'll just go around.
Did you want Mike or Melissa to respond?
Thank you so much.
No. Mike or Melissa, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think Jim answered it correctly, which is, I think what we're proposing, or what's being proposed here, are changes that would not require a zoning change. This is all by right. If you wanted to add 2 or 3 full units, and go to more of a multi-family zone, then you would go through the zoning change process. So, right. But these I don't see these proposals as requiring any zoning changes whatsoever.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And so we'll turn it over to Kristen. You have a question or feedback?
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the parking space requirement for an ADU. Is there a way for someone to request a variance for that? I'm thinking if an older adult wants to move into an ADU, maybe they don't own a vehicle and so wouldn't need an additional parking space. Is that something that someone can request a variance for?
Yeah, you can get a variance for anything, right? But the language here, and the real estate council spoke up on this one too. We're trying to encourage affordable dwelling units, and a lot of our accessory dwelling units, folks don't have a car, or as you just described, Kristen. But we still want to ensure that we're not adversely impacting neighborhood streets with car overload and trash can overload and recycling bin overload. And so what we're proposing is some language that allows homeowners to get creative about how they accommodate that second parking space on the site. And, as Sarah mentioned, it could be you've got a driveway that's adequate for 2 or 3 or 4 cars. You can demonstrate that as a form of compliance. And I'm not sure, and ultimately, if there really just isn't room for more than 1 car, yeah, you have to go get a variance.
Thank you.
So I just want to add to that too, that there is not a parking requirement per the amendment that we're submitting that would apply for ADUs under 800 feet. And I would like to invite the DSD team if they have anything else they want to say on that, because that is something that we do get a lot of questions on, is parking.
Mike, you want me to chime in?
Sure.
So you are correct, sir. The amendment I believe that y'all have is associated with the ADU. Accessory dwelling units don't have parking requirements, but the actual dwelling for new construction does. And so, but like Jim mentioned, there is a variance process if they want to get out of that parking requirement.
Any other questions?
Jeff has his.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to really thank the committee because this is a lot of work to do in a very short period of time, and really want to acknowledge that. I had one small question about I think it was parkland. There were two examples, one where it was a small, let's see, there we go. You have 50 units within an 8-minute walk, and there's 100 units within a 20-minute walk. Is it the distance, is it the number of units, or is it a combination that differentiates those?
That's probably a question for Rachel. Pull up the specific language.
What's the question?
Repeat your question.
Okay, so the question is the examples have two different size developments at different distances, and they have two different outcomes or requirements. And I was just trying to determine whether that difference in requirements is based on the distance, in other words, the 8-minute walk versus a 20-minute walk, the increase in the number of units, 100 versus 50, or some combination of those two.
Yeah, so the Trust for Public Lands methodology is based on the distance from the nearest park. So their guidance is a 10-minute walk. So if there's a park within a 10-minute walk from the development, then there wouldn't be a park required. But it's the distance that would take it over.
Okay.
So,
so just to make sure I'm clear, if you had 100 units located within 8 minutes, it's the 8 minutes that would drive it. And if you had 50 units within 20 minutes, it would be the 20 minutes that drive it.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's very clear. And I just have one kind of general question, because a lot of times when I look at these, or when I see these, it's always like, here's what the requirement is, here's what we're recommending, and here's why. And I got the general sense, which has been confirmed, that that much of this is to make it a bit easier to do this development. And I just want to make sure that I understand, because there probably were purposes in the original requirements that we are going to change. And I just want to make sure I understand that, what we are giving up, if we're giving anything up, or.
Are you, Jeff, are you asking about a specific amendment, or are you just asking?
No, I'm talking about the concept. I mean, there's a bunch of them that all, are oriented from my perspective at making it a bit easier. I'm not talking about them individually. I'm talking about them collectively versus what's there.
I can talk about maybe sort of the philosophical underpinning of this whole discussion, and and maybe the DSD people can talk a little bit more specifically about the trade-offs. But generally speaking, the idea here was to do two things. One, well, it's to remove barriers to affordable housing, and not just housing in general, affordable housing, right? And we're going to do that by one, removing unnecessary tasks or fees or costs from the development process, right? Where there is no discernible public impact one way or another, right? And so we got to that with a lot of the ADUs, right? Through those 27 meetings that they mentioned previously, where we talked about, like, what could possibly happen? What's the worst thing that could possibly happen if we did this? And we had a dry erase board, and we were, like actually drawing this stuff out and using, case studies and so forth to try to figure it out, right? So it is, how can we do good without doing any harm, right? And then the second kind of broad philosophical underpinning is this idea that we need to shift the cost burden away from affordable housing, preservation, rehabilitation, and production, right? And much of the development code is set up to figure out who pays for things, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's about public safety in there, but a lot of it's also about like who's going to bear responsibility for, you know, construction and maintenance of this stuff over time. And what we're finding is that, you know, you saw there were some things that needed to get kind of pulled out. It's because either we couldn't come to an agreement on who needed to pay for it, or there was a public safety issue that we needed to kind of think through, like relating to stormwater, right? I mean, there's public safety implications to that. So this idea of shifting the cost burden is about saying things like, you know, the parkland dedication, right? Every San Antonian needs to have access to a park within 10 minutes, right? Like, and we're super focused on bringing up our park access score throughout San Antonio. However, there's no reason why the affordable housing development should have to finance the cost and pay interest on the money that they borrow to put that housing in place, to pay into a pot of funds that is being expended for the public good, right? There are other sources of funding for that that we need to be looking at, right? And so that's an example of not doing any harm, but shifting the cost burden back to the government rather than the individual development, right? And so that kind of flows through a lot of these that you're saying. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, first of all, I thank you for an elegant response to an inelegant question. But you answered the question that I had perfectly, and I'm very, I think the thing that really spoke to me was the fact that you looked at what's the worst that could happen, right? You took all of that into consideration. So obviously removing barriers to affordable housing is the task at hand, and I firmly support that. But yeah, your response made me very comfortable with what's been recommended. Thank you.
Anyone else? Were there any other hands raised or?
Can I ask a quick question? So just
Yeah.
in terms of timeline, so I know there's a group that met before COVID hit and then a group that met recently. So I don't know if it's relevant or not, just interesting, but how does the amendments that are presented today break down between the group that met before and then the new group that we brought on recently?
I can take that one, and Jim, if you want to piggyback off what I say, please do. The group that met originally started meeting in 2019, and they had really focused a lot of their work on the ADU amendments. So what this subcommittee did when they started meeting in November was kind of initially review the ADU amendments, bless them, and move into these regulatory cost burden conversations, which resulted in the 3 proposals before you. So they built off one another and will continue to do so as the committee works forward.
Yeah, and I can add to that. So of the, 15, 16 that are proposed, 12 or so came directly out of that first group. The other 3 were discussed at length. And this is where this concept of shifting the cost burden emerged in our thinking, is through that process. We had numerous meetings where had SAWs come in, CPS, so the tree protection guys, development services, like everybody who is involved in any of these issues was involved in the conversation. And we began to think about shifting the cost burden and what things that we just kind of couldn't touch, right? Things that involve public safety and, flooding downstream and so on and so forth, right? I mean, we began to develop an idea of like, what's just like literally off limits and what can we, begin to tinker around the edges with. And in the last couple of months, we took a lot of that work that we had done and looked at probably another 15 or so potential amendments, which through our discussion process since December has been winnowed down to 3 additional recommendations because the others were all just too complicated, need more study, or were just downright unworkable, in our opinion.
Got it. Thank you. And then one more quick question. So I know that the public can also submit UDC amendments. So do any of these overlap with things that were already submitted by members of the community on their own?
I think that's a question for staff.
Oh, yeah, Melissa can too, but from what I saw, there was no overlap as of right now, but when there will be overlap, part of the process is to bring those two groups together to have a discussion. But Melissa, if you want to expand on that.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a very good explanation. So yes, anyone from the general public can submit UDC amendments. It is Development Services' job to coordinate those UDC amendments with the applicable city departments and then ensure that they are not contradicting or conflicting with an existing UDC amendment that has been submitted or a different code. So we have to vet every single one of those. And if there are two that come in the same, which in the past there have been some that have come in that are similar, we work with both parties, bring them together to ensure that they both agree in combining the amendment and meeting the intent of their proposed initial amendment. So that's the work that we do behind the scenes.
So Melissa, I do know that the planning department was doing some preliminary work on accessory dwelling units. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And I don't know if they not submit and just kind of go with what we're doing, but that may be a consideration.
That's perfect point there. We will coordinate with them when they're submitting and ensure if they compare all the UDC amendments and make sure there's nothing that's conflicting, or if there's something that's complementing, if there's a way to combine them, because maybe someone's tweaking one word versus another. So those are the things that we will look and make sure we resolve that before this moves forward through the formal process.
Okay, all right. Well, if there's no more questions, let me move us along. Well, let me take a moment to.
I have one thing.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Abe.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations on a tremendous amount of work to get to this point. I think it's fantastic. But and this is maybe a rhetorical question, but as the chair of the Public Engagement and Outreach Subcommittee, I have to ask. The 114 comments that were made, I'm thinking that they were probably addressed, but just for the record, could somebody put it on the record that they have been addressed?
Yes. They, in part, we removed amendments from consideration that were not supported. The rest of them did get really broad support from the public. We got some good questions like the one Jim mentioned from the Real Estate Council about parking, and we're responsive to those. Within the next probably 24 hours, we'll have, just like we did with the SHIP, a full summary of all of the public comment we received and staff responses to it. That went over well when we did it with SHIP, and we want to keep doing that with our policies going forward.
Thank you.
So Madam Chair, yes. I would move to approve the recommended amendments presented by the staff and to have them submitted to Development Services by February 1st, 2022. Thank you for bringing that slide up, folks. I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. There is a motion and a second for approval of the item. Especially thank you to Pete and Nikki for serving on the subcommittee. We're very grateful for always the continued support of our commissioners and for really getting involved with these different programs. So thank you very much. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Motion carries. Let me move us along to the next item, which is briefing and possible action related to formation of renters issues subcommittee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So by way of background, commissioners, This originated from a council consideration request from then council member Trevino back in June 2019. And the goal of the CCR was really to elevate renters' issues, not just among the housing commission per se, but really citywide. And some of the notes in that CCR are highlighted on your screen, and I'll just read them aloud for folks who can't see. It says 46% of housing units in San Antonio are occupied by renters. The median rent at the time had increased by 18% since 2010, with median household income at just under $34,000. And again, at the time the CCR was written, pre-pandemic, eviction filings had more than tripled since 2010. Next slide. That gives you kind of a sense of the context. And as part of staff's process, when we get council consideration requests like this, our first thing is to kind of explore best practices, examples, and then go to the public, hear, what do you think? So we did an SA Speak Up survey and focus groups in fall of 2020 to get more insight from the public about what would you do with this group? Do you support it? If there were one, what would you like it to look like? Who would you want to be on it? Those kinds of things. And we got a lot of responses on this. I remember we actually did some targeted emails to both renters and housing providers who had participated in our emergency housing assistance program, and they gave us a lot of good feedback. So we got a pretty good mix of both renters, property owners and operators, and a lot of folks who were just following the issue as homeowners, people experiencing homelessness, and in other kind of middle of the road housing situations where maybe they don't have a formal lease, they're staying with family, things like that. So really broad engagement from folks on this issue. So we last briefed Housing Commission on it in January of 2021. Next slide, sorry, Allison. Oh, there we go. It's just been a day for technology. Thank you all for bearing with us. And the Housing Commission agreed with staff's recommendations on creating a subcommittee of the Housing Commission to take up this issue rather than a standalone committee. There was a desire for the majority of the members to be renters, but also that property owners and landlords be included in the discussion. Next slide. We did brief the Culture and Neighborhood Services Committee, which is now the public, or excuse me, the PCDC committee that we speak to, and they agreed with that recommendation and gave some more specific information for you all. So they want to see a renters focused subcommittee of the Housing Commission, fully 9 members. At least 4 of those would be renters, 3 would be property managers or owners, and at least 2 would be housing commissioners. And the charge of this group would include, but is not limited to, these things, but focusing on rental assistance, tenants' rights and legal aid, engagement, outreach, and training, and legislative items. So these really align with several of the SHIP strategies around public information campaigns and system-wide eviction for mortgage foreclosure reform. So we really feel like this is a good forum to have those conversations with the public. Next slide. Here's a little bit more formal of a breakdown. You've seen this slide before when you formed your other subcommittees as to what the charge would look like, what the membership would look like, and what the goals of this subcommittee would be. So meeting frequency we propose could be determined once you have a full slate of 9 folks. And of course, just like we do with the other subcommittees, we're pretty flexible with additional meetings as need be. Your membership composition is below there as described. And we propose 2-year staggered terms with a 2-term limit. This is in alignment with the other subcommittees that are currently operating under the commission. And as goals, these are the fruits of conversation with Housing Commission in early 2021 and with CNFC to make recommendations to Housing Commission on renter-related issues, especially as they relate to SHIP. Ensure that renters have a voice on renter-related issues and are part of commission conversations. And also, this is a really important one that emerged in our survey results, encouraging the development of relationships and understanding between property managers and renters. Next slide, thank you. So for next steps, if you decide to proceed establishing the subcommittee, We would propose that you select 2 commissioners to work with staff and the Public Engagement and Outreach Subcommittee on developing an application and a recruitment plan to reach all of the folks that we would need in the subcommittee. We can present that plan at the February meeting and then launch the recruitment process from there, with targeting April for your appointments. Next slide. So we'll turn it back over to you, Chair. There is motion language on your screen.
All right, so I guess this requires action even, okay. So, well, let's start, again, I was on the council when we were going through this exercise, and it was definitely the will of the council and the mayor to have this become a subcommittee of the Housing Commission. So we do need 2 housing commissioners. So I can voluntold, or if anybody wants to volunteer, it seems that, either maybe Ed, Kristen, okay. So
I'd
Kristen.
be happy to volunteer too.
And Nikki. So I think if we could have Nikki, because I think Nikki's a renter, if I remember correctly. Is that right, Nikki? Yes, okay. And so if we could have a renter, and then at least, I thought either Ed or Kristen, since they have rental properties at large scale. So so if Kristen's willing, and so if we can have Kristen and Nikki as commissioners, and then from there, we'll ask for the motion to have the subcommittee of the Public Engagement Committee to review those applications. We need to, however y'all did it the last time to get the word out for the commissioners that we used for the
PEO.
Yeah, that was a great exercise. I thought we got a great a team of people. So however y'all did it that last time, I think if y'all can use that same model, that would be great. So
I have
any
a
other
quick question.
Okay, go ahead, Amanda.
So on the 2-year term, so if we're looking to recruit community members, right? 2 years is a long time to ask someone to serve, especially if you're looking at the renter population. And for me, I'm thinking I would love to have a senior, right, on this subcommittee. I don't know if a senior citizen can commit to a 2-year, volunteer role. In addition to thinking about public transportation, how to get there, virtual, I mean, that's barrier on top of barrier. So I just wonder if maybe, well, one, what's the background on, or how do we come to the decision on a 2-year term versus a 1-year term, and what that looks like, maybe like why or why not.
I think that's a great suggestion, Commissioner Keemer. We proposed 2 years because that was in alignment with the other subcommittees, but certainly it's Commission's prerogative if they'd like to make that shorter or different.
And I guess for the other commissioners too, to be aware, the ways I'm thinking of it too is renter, and I was a renter, right? Just recently became a homeowner, but it changes so much, right? From 6 months to 12 months, a lot can happen. You can move properties. I think I'm not too worried about not having, diverse perspectives in the 1-year limit versus a 2-year. But I just worry that we're burdening people in meetings. I don't know. Just putting it out there. I don't know what the other commissioners think.
Okay. Commissioner Alanis?
Thank you. I don't mind the 2-year term. Personally, if somebody needs to come on and they want to go ahead and commit for a 2-year period, I think that's okay. They always have the option, if for some reason conditions change, that they can resign from that committee. If for some reason they can't serve the full term, I mean, that's always not, it's not like it's a prison sentence where somebody has to be on for 2 years. If they see that they can't, for whatever reason, meet that commitment, they can always resign from the committee and we can look to replace someone. But I think it's good to also have consistency in your policy making, and it's tough to do that over just a 1-year period and then you switch out and now we have a whole set of new renters. I think that's just a challenge when it comes to consistency in policymaking. So that's just my 2 cents.
I think
And another thought, I'm sorry, well, just one thought I have is that I don't think they're not necessarily going to meet monthly. I think it depends on the issue, and it depends on the subcommittee. Probably the commissioners who chair will determine when the meetings are and as necessary. But anyway, I'll turn it back to whomever was. Amanda, were you trying to chime back in?
No, it was Commissioner Johnson.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
I think also it's more of it being a limit of how long you can serve before a new committee is selected versus you are bound and chained to 2 years. So like Commissioner Annalise was saying, if someone can't do the whole 2 years or they need to leave or they no longer want to be on the committee, they do have the option to leave. But I think it's the limitation on the amount of time that you can serve. It was more of why we decided on the 2-year limit, also to keep in alignment with the other subcommittees and policy boards or committees.
Does anybody have any other feedback on the 2-year terms? I'm comfortable with the 2-year term. I think it also just, again, depends on how often the committee decides they want to meet. And given the charges of the committee, I think they will meet as needed. So I think there were particularly 4 that was mentioned. Not goals, but wasn't it?
At the top.
Okay. Emergency rental assistant, tenants' rights, okay, education, outreach, training. And so legislative items would only be every 2 years anyway. Any other feedback on that, or does anybody want to comment on the recommendation here by staff?
Chair, just real quick, if I understand it. So it's a 2-year limit and there is no renewal associated with that term limit. Is that correct? We're not authorizing the renewal?
The 2 terms, so you could serve up to 4 years.
Okay, so two times 2. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Would a compromise to that? Yeah, would a compromise to that being a 1 year at the option of the renter to stay on for the additional year? It's like it's at their option. I'm trying to find some middle ground, because I understand the issues. I just want to see if there was maybe some middle ground.
And I think, first of all, I think you can resign at any time. So again, you can resign at any time, but if a person is not showing up, isn't there also if you consistently don't come to the meeting, aren't you then encouraged to resign? Is that or we don't have that stipulation in this one? No? So nothing about absences?
I think that is important, though, that it should be in there in any committee. If folks have committed to it and they're just not showing up 2-3 times in a row, it's like, what's the point of serving and taking up that space? I definitely think anytime there's a committee that there should be some language that allows for them to be removed by the subcommittee, so we can put another renter in there.
Yeah.
Or
And I know that's
the
owner,
right?
I think Jermaine maybe can weigh in on if that part can be determined by, the subcommittee appointments, like when they are meeting and setting their ground rules, if that's something they can decide or if it needs to be formalized now.
So first of all, I was going to say that the three unexcused absences is the standard. The city's boards and commissions ordinance establishes that for all city boards and commissions. Now, this is not a city board or commission, but it's a subcommittee of a city's board or commission. So I would say we probably want to remain consistent with that. That said, I think that the Housing Commission, as the governing body that oversees the subcommittee, the Housing Commission should be the one that that sets that rule, not the members themselves. They don't set their own rules. The rules are set by the commission.
Okay. All All right, well, any further discussion on this issue? We're looking for a motion or an amendment or any further discussion.
I'd be happy to move if you can bring up that language again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here you go, Kristen.
Thank you. I move that the Housing Commission form a 9-person renters issue subcommittee of the Housing Commission to be comprised of 4 renters, 3 property managers or owners, 2 housing commissioners, and that the members serve staggered 2-year terms with a two-term limit, and that the charge of the subcommittee be to advise the Housing Commission on renter-related issues.
I will second that motion.
Oh.
Okay, there is a motion and a second for approval of the item. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Motion carries. We will move on to, I think, Beto, am I turning it over to you for, is that right?
Just one quick question on that
Oh,
item.
okay.
Hi, good afternoon. Did that previous motion also include the appointees of the 2 members as well, that you named with Nikki and Kristen? Just want to make sure that it did reflect that
thank
the
you.
2 to serve are those 2 that you seem
That
to have consensus around.
they volunteered, right? I think.
Chair, I would like to go ahead and move that we have Nikki Johnson and Kristen Davila be the housing commissioners appointed to this particular subcommittee.
Okay. A second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and a second for Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Davila to be appointed. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Beto. And so actually what we're looking at now is subcommittee report outs.
Yes, so we don't have slides for this, but we were going to invite.
There's one slide.
Oh, there is one slide. I'm sorry. There's a slide that was going to say exactly what I was going to say. So we're going to have the dashboard and annual report subcommittee be presented by Commissioner Alanis, just a quick report out, and then the public engagement and outreach subcommittee by Commissioner Abraham.
Okay. Okay, well, let me turn it over first to Commissioner Alanis and then to Commissioner Abraham.
Well, this is the first I'm hearing I'm giving a subcommittee report out, so a little unprepared. But overall, we have met to discuss what the different dashboards, should look like and the type of data that could be provided. I think it's still going to be a work in progress to make sure that all that gets appropriately funneled up to our IT department to get processed into the appropriate dashboard. And now that we have the SHIP, which is approved, it's making sure everything, all that data and all those items are properly aligned. That way we are reporting out some good information, not only from the Housing Commission, what we're doing, but also what's being done, collectively, with the SHIP and so forth. So I think those are some things we'll still need to discuss a little bit, but overall, I think things are going well. Any questions?
I'll just add that as a new member to the subcommittee, I'm really excited about this work, and I think it's really going to help people understand where we're at with these different measurables or objectives and things like that. So this is going to be really fun to watch.
Sorry, you were muted.
Oh, sorry. Commissioner Abraham, did you want to make a few comments? Or I don't know if you're prepared for a committee report?
I am so prepared. with the help of the wonderful folks at Neighborhood Housing anyways. The subcommittee has now had 2 full meetings and has provided recommendations to staff on strategies for public engagement on SHIP, as well as the Udc amendments that remove barriers subcommittee has worked on. The subcommittee has continued conversation with regular check-ins on progress. Staff has already implemented many of these recommendations over the last couple of months, including the American Sign Language interpretation, providing content at more accessible locations, such as public libraries, increasing and conducting public bilingual meetings in locations spread out throughout the community, placing videos and hybrid meetings on city website, social media, and council office blast, and continuing with VIA about transportation and advertisement on their vehicles. Subcommittee members are also posting events and bulletins to Nextdoor and Facebook. And our next meeting is February 3rd, and to continue on this quest. Also, I'd like to add in here that I talked to Bill Mahone, the Director of Community Engagement at SARA, just yesterday. And they have a PowerPoint presentation called Homelessness 101. And I'd like to suggest that that we get them to do a presentation. It can only, they can hone it down to, 10 minutes or 15 minutes maximum anyways, to do a presentation to the Housing Commission and those listening in. I think it's important to work with this relationship with Sarah. So that's my report.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner. And we'll work with staff to get that presentation, hopefully maybe for the next meeting. I think it's important to hear what other agencies are doing, especially as it relates to permanent supportive housing. We know that there's bond dollars available for permanent supportive housing. 25 million is the recommendation, but there may be additional funds available through the federal government or some other source. And so I think it's important for the Housing Commission to understand that particular side of our community that's unhoused currently. So thank you, Commissioner, for that recommendation.
Also, if I may, Bill Mahone, spelled Mahone, and his phone number is 210-876-0720, extension 114. Hopefully somebody can contact him and move this along to the agenda committee.
Great, thank you. I look forward to that. Hopefully we can have that next time if we have availability.
I'm going to have to jump off right at 1 o'clock here myself. So.
Okay, I'm sure we'll hopefully. Oh no, we got Beto. I know your presentation is long, but we do usually hope to end the meeting by 1, so that's our given time slot. But I think now, Beto, is it time to turn it over to you for the director's report?
Yes, ma'am. And my goal is to finish right at 1. And so if you would please, there's a lot more detail in your packet. So I'll go very quickly through these items. First, with regards to the questions you had at your previous meeting, you asked for some DSD permit information, and that is in your packet. So I'll direct you to that information that you requested from last time. Second, we are so happy and delighted that the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan was adopted by City Council in December. There's a few other bodies that need to also approve the document. And so what you see in front of you is the next steps with regards to the San Antonio Housing Authority, the San Antonio Housing Trust, and Bexar County. Those are our partners in the SHIP. And so they will be looking at adopting the document as well in February and March. And so you see the next steps for us there. And again, grateful for all of you and the staff team that did a great job putting this together. In addition, there's a lot of work in the SHIP for our team, for the commission, and we continue to invite individuals who have an interest in one of the policies to sign up through our SA Speak Up portal to be a part of shaping those policies. As we mentioned at council and with you, a lot of the work will have its own public engagement, stakeholder involvement. And so this is one way in which we're inviting the public to continue to be engaged and to shape the policies that are going to be fleshed out over the next few years that are included in the SHIP. Again, we'll have reports letting you know how we're doing at the Housing Commission. And you heard about the dashboard. That'll be something as well that also is a way to track our progress when it comes to the strategic housing implementation plan. We're in the middle of hiring a bunch of staff to help us with the policy work as well. And so we look forward to coming forward with the policy so that we can make the SHIP this living document and implement a lot of that work. Moving on to the next item, our commission chair already mentioned the housing bond. And so I want to just let you know broadly what some of the items are in that in case you didn't follow it. But I know I saw a lot of you at the public meetings that the Housing Committee for the bond held. Ultimately, what the co-chairs, including our commission chair, presented to City Council was what is in front of you. And again, this detail is also in your packet, that there was a recommendation to have 45 million allocated for homeownership rehab and preservation, 40 million for rental housing acquisition, rehab, and preservation, 25 million for permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, 35 million for rental housing production and acquisition, and 5 million for homeownership production. There's a lot more detail that the committee went into, but these are the broad categories that were presented to council. In terms of the next steps, City Council was presented these by the chairs, but there's still the council action to actually call for the election. That is scheduled for February 10th. And so that's when the whole bond package, not just housing, is presented to council so that they can call for the election. And the actual election for our community will be on May 7th, 2022. So there are next steps for the whole bond program itself. And again, there's more detail on the packet, and there's also a web page just dedicated to the bond, so you can actually track and hear recorded meetings, see the minutes, see all the responses to many of the questions that we received. The next item has to do with the American Rescue Plan Act home funding that the city received. This is funding that I've mentioned to you before, roughly 20 million allocated to the city of San Antonio. And this is to benefit qualifying populations. Those are defined in the next slide that are really individuals impacted by housing instability, a lot of the folks experiencing homelessness. So the eligible uses of fund, affordable rental housing, tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate emergency shelters, as you see here. We have gone through a consultation and community input process to have a recommendation for how to allocate the funds between the eligible categories serving the qualified populations. And what you see in front of you is how we propose to spend that $20 million or so. We're putting money into permanent supportive housing as well. This bucket of funding from the federal government is very well suited for that. But we're also putting money into case management as well as tenant-based rental assistance. And again, this is a priority for those qualifying populations. In this instance, people experiencing chronic homelessness or survivors of domestic violence. And then case management, all important to ensure there's wraparound services provided, so funding for that. And some funding for administration of the grant itself. So this too is moving forward to council. We've had public meetings, we presented to PCD, we had public hearings as well. And we are moving forward to have council consider this on February 10th as well. So this is the use of the home ARPA. So, and ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act. Finally, just quick update on some of the funding recommendations out of our grants monitoring administration. It's just presented to you as information. So we use entitlement grants to help us develop or preserve affordable housing. All of this in alignment with both our 5-year consolidated plan as well as the Mayor's Housing Policy Task Force. And now, of course, we'll utilize the SHIP to help with the RFPs that we use. So, excuse me, so it is a competitive process. And we have several federal grants that fall under this category. So one of the programs is NSP, and we went through this process with about $500,000 being recommended. The next slide. Excuse me. Has the other federal funding categories. This is the home program and our community development block grant. And in front of you are the recommendations for what is going or who the developments are going to be recommended for funding. You can see affordability periods, the unit mix. You can see our rental housing development as well as the home ownership development and what the unit mix for each of these will be. And so these recommendations have been presented to our Planning and Community Development Council Committee. They've gone through the Audit and Accountability Committee. At least Home and CDBG had to go through that process because of the award amounts exceeding $1 million. So we designated it as high profile. But this is just to give you a heads up that we continue to use our funding to go ahead and build and preserve affordable housing in our community on top of future money that we may receive. Then I'll finally move to EHAP. And I know we're at the 1 p.m. mark. I was trying to get through this very quickly, so I'll give me a couple minutes to go through this. The Emergency Housing Assistance Program was created back in April 2022 out of the policy developed for risk mitigation. This was in response to the pandemic. We have the eligibility and assistance provided in front of you. The program has gone through several phases of funding, and we have changed the allowances a few times. So if we go on to the next slide, you see our current allowances, which were in place once we received a lot of money from the U.S. Treasury out of a couple bills adopted or passed by Congress in 2021, and then ARPA in early 2020, actually 2020 and early 2021. So once we accepted that additional money, these are the allowances: rent or mortgage, utility bills. And we staggered it by income levels, so those with lower incomes could get more assistance. As of last week, I think I used the data from last week in the next slide, you can see that individuals in homes throughout every council district have been approved. And you can see how many families have been impacted. And as of January 19th, how many has been approved for direct welfare. Now, that's not counting the administrative costs, but that's the actual money that was paid out to families, individuals, landlords, utility companies. We have a partnership with the county where we run the program for them as well out of the same funding source, but their allocation. And so that's why you see the county there. The next slide has our total budget since the program was started. Again, we've in phase 4, so we've had different funding. We've been eligible for and received grants from the state as well, so that has supplemented our work. And we have received money from TERSES, the San Antonio Housing Trust, the General Fund, the federal grants that we have, and the last biggest buckets have been the Emergency Rental Assistance ERA money from U.S. Treasury received last year. Well, our money's running out, and we did request reallocated funds from ERA, from U.S. Treasury. And that reallocated money is something that's on the agenda for council to appropriate for use in EHAP. So that's $4.5 million that is going to be added. There's a recommendation today at B session for additional funding to EHAP out of the city's local recovery funds out of the American Rescue Plan Act. I've mentioned that to you all before. And so there'll be additional money so that we can continue to run the program. However, we're not going to have enough money to indefinitely run the program. The money is going to run out. Sometimes we go through $500,000 in one day, and that's the assistance we provide, and I monitor that daily. And so it is time for us to close the portal and the program and the intake for the Emergency Housing Assistance Program. But do not despair. The program and the emergency word might be dropping out of the title, but we continue to have a program here at the city. Any funds that do remain after we close the portal, we'll process applications after March 1. We'll continue to have staff pay out under the current policy, but we'll revert back to our risk mitigation policy. And actually that program is going to be rebranded as our housing assistance program. It's easier to say housing assistance rather than risk mitigation. I told the council, if I say risk mitigation, they think I'm selling them insurance. But if I say housing assistance, everyone understands what that is, especially because we've had such a successful emergency housing assistance program. And so we will rebrand the program as from risk mitigation to housing assistance. We will run it under the policy for the risk mitigation plan. By the time we transition, if we need to bring it in front of you for any tweaks to the policy, we'll take time to do that. But the current program guidelines will stay in place after we close the portal through May, because that's how much time will take us to close out the money we currently have. And any funds that remain will transition to the risk mitigation fund policy / housing assistance program. You all should know that the risk mitigation program is something that's part of our base budget. Even after we close the COVID-19 EHAP, we'll continue to have that funding in our base budget. At a minimum going forward, there'll be $1 million out of the general fund for that. And there could be additional money in the future as well. But as a base, every year we'll have $1 million that will be used for our housing assistance program. We are working to let the community know that we're going to close the portal. We're giving everyone a list of additional resources, primarily around utility assistance. And we look forward to having the additional money for reallocated funding, as well as the local recovery funds from ARPA being added to the budget, so that those in the queue and those that apply in the month up to March 1 can continue to get assistance. And you all will be part of our public engagement and getting the word out that even though EHAP is being closed, there are still additional resources, and we will continue to have a program to help our community. And that's my presentation. Sorry it took longer. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And I'll leave the last slide about upcoming community meetings for you to pursue if you think there are questions. If you have any questions for me. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Beto, for your presentation. And it is a little bit after 1. There's no action here, so if anybody needs to leave, they can. But I do have, I have a couple of questions. Especially, I know that, the city has had we didn't call it emergency assistance, but we had a rental assistance program for quite a long time. At least, most of the years I was here prior on the council. But I have a question about, you have here 2 separate line items, and one of them is, it was called homelessness prevention, and then another one called rental assistance. So one was for $5 million and one is for $2 million and something. I lost the graph. But
ARPA? I think that was the previous
within the so you'll see it here. That's not it.
It was from ARPA. Farther back.
So can you tell me what is the difference between so tenant-based rental assistance and homeless prevention and case management? Can you tell me the difference?
Sure. So tenant-based rental assistance does help to pay for rent. And so it's actual direct rent that can be paid. It also has some supportive services that are part of that, but this is actually very much like our housing assistance program. So it pays for rent for qualified families. The homeless prevention and case management are the social services that a family can receive in order to stay housed wherever they are. So the rent, we currently have TBRA, that's Destination for Tenant-Based Rental Assistance, funded out of our ESG program and HOPWA, and that helps families living with HIV or AIDS continue to pay their rent, but we know they need other case management services as well. So it's a similar model to that. So the tenant-based rental assistance is to help pay rent for the qualified families, whereas the homeless prevention and case management is if we need to get someone housed, the case management services that go into that, finding them the right place, getting a case manager to help them stay housed, maybe making sure that the person gets an ID if they need that, is able to secure their Social Security if they haven't been able to receive that, change of address forms, for example, so they can receive some income. And so that's what the case management portion of that would be. But it's all around case management for those experiencing homelessness to get them housed. So that's
okay. And so I guess more expensive per person? Okay.
Yes, because it's staffing cost, and it's someone that you get a case manager and hopefully you hear from them often, as opposed to once a year checking in, like, are you still housed? And so it's staffing for the support service, and it's
Okay.
a case manager or multiple case managers that help one individual.
But it looks like we helped a lot of people with that, almost the same as a rental assistant, or more than the rental assistance, with half the money. So how is that possible, I guess? Would seem that would be more expensive.
Yes, so this would be in combination of things that we do. Again, this is staffing costs that would go to nonprofit agencies that provide case management assistance. And all of this would be, for qualified organizations that do this. The tenant-based rental assistance is more tied to the individual, and the payments are either to the nonprofit serving them or to the landlord. And so that's how that was derived. And we worked on this budget in partnership with DHS, who currently administers very similar programs and have many years of metrics of who they have served. And so the case management and the people served are through those nonprofit agencies that would have the staffing to provide this number of people. The rental assistance, again, more tied to where the individual is being housed. And so that's why we're able to serve that number of people, but it's still expensive housing or expensive rent, since we are covering a significant portion. And it'll vary, once someone gets Social Security and that kind of income, maybe TBRA is not as intense as at the beginning. But those are the differences. And again, DHS is who we are partnering to help us implement the funding and select who are the agencies that will have the money to provide the service in the community.
Okay.
Chair,
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
It's just adding on to your question, your line of questioning. For TBRA, that 5.2 million for 275 folks, is that about a 2-year program? Are you looking at serving, I don't know, $800 a month for 2 years, essentially, for all 275?
Yeah.
Okay. And great. So, and that is the same for the homeless prevention and case management. We're anticipating these dollars being about a 2-year period.
Yes, those two line items are about for 2 years, but we have a longer horizon to expend the funding. So, for example, the permanent supportive housing, because we're dealing with a construction, acquisition, rehab kind of work, we're going to have a longer period of time for that. And so we anticipate it'll take us longer than 2 years to expend that portion of the funding.
Commissioner Johnson says.
Commissioner Johnson's got her hand raised if you want to ask your question.
Yes, can we go back to the slide that that mentioned the different increments of time that people could still receive assistance even if they've already been helped. Okay, so here, Veto, my question is it says all applicants are eligible for 6 or 9 months, regardless of prior assistance. That does include CPS utilities?
Yes, it does. But this became effective February 18th of 2021. So since February 18th, we've been, in essence, it was a clean slate. So anyone who applied prior to that date could come in and apply again. If we had helped them with 3 months and cash assistance before, they could come in and ask for assistance once again. And so that's the policy that we're operating. And we do have folks who are repeat applicants, just like we've had different waves of the COVID, spikes. So someone may have needed help back in 2020, they stabilized a little bit, and then Delta caused them to have reduced hours once again. And so they could come back and apply. If we had only helped them 3 months, they could come back and ask for 3 more months. And now with Omicron, I expect more people have had to quarantine and they might need the additional 3 months, for example. And so they'll max out at the 9 months. But people can come and reapply, and starting in February, we allowed everyone to come in and apply again.
I do remember law implemented that last year. Are you aware that there are people that did receive prior assistance, went back and applied and were denied, with the reason being that they had already received assistance and it wasn't the cap, they had received it once? And so in those cases, who does someone contact if they've been denied, even though they've only received help one time? And it does say that everybody will be eligible.
So it has to be someone that applied after February 18th, 2021. So people prior to that were denied. And we have an appeal process in place. The appeals go to the program manager, Annabelle Villa, or myself. And so there is a way to appeal, but we have the policy where we write the appeal process. Now, the other thing about this program is it is dependent on funding source. The federal money we got from U.S. Treasury is called Emergency Rental Assistance. So the mortgage assistance portion is a lot smaller because it did not come from the feds. And so we have closed intake for mortgages at the moment, because we have applications in the queue that will use up the about 2 million that we have left. So we have already alerted the public that our funding source, we can't use ERA money for mortgages. And so we're denying any applications moving forward. We're denying because there's no funding source. Hopefully that changes with the ARPA money, but for the moment, we're denying them. We're letting them know they could reapply in February with additional money.
But just people, the CPS though, if it was after the time frame that you mentioned, and it was CPS, and the reason that they were denied was that they had already received assistance, how do they go about appealing? Is there a link on the website? Like, how do they go about appealing?
So it generates with a call to our call center, or an email to me or to Annabelle. So I mean, I get these calls all the time, and then I go through the process of outlining our policy. But the call center, we call 311, and we ask that we want to have an appeal. The call taker takes the information that gets sent to me or to Annabelle. And then we have a certain amount of time to look at the case and make a determination. But that's how we do it. Now, part of our policy here in the allowances is if someone is just applying for CPS or utilities, we have to bundle it. So it has to be rent and utilities. If they're just applying for utilities, we do refer them to either the DHS Utility Assistance Program, to the county's LIHEAP program, and the county has a lot of money to help with utility assistance at the moment. We have a strong partnership with them, or to the new programs that have just been set up by CPS and SAWS, since they got 30 million of that local recovery funding from ARPA to help bring their clients who are in arrears up to bring them current. So CPS and SAWS have done a lot of outreach. We do refer people to them if all they want is utility assistance, because our money, we're trying to focus it on rent and mortgage to keep people housed, knowing there are more resources out there, more money than we have left actually for utility assistance at the moment. So those are the other resources. And again, people asking for mortgage assistance, if they ask for utility assistance, we are referring them back to SAWS CPS, the county for utility assistance. And we're not covering that because we'd rather focus on keeping many more families paying their mortgage and avoid foreclosure than helping them with the utility on the mortgage side. So we are making a lot of referrals right now.
Will you all be removing the ability to select utility only from the application on the website? Because that's a little bit misleading, because the option is there to only apply for utility assistance. You actually go through the application only to be denied or sent somewhere else. So are you all going to be taking that off the website? Because I wasn't aware that you're either trying to bundle it or only do rental and not as much CPS, because that's where we've been telling people to go, because that's what we were told. So are they going to remove that?
Our webpage already directs people to, they either apply for housing assistance or utility assistance. So if you go to our webpage, you can toggle between both. And if someone just selects utility assistance, they get the automatic, you should toggle to utility assistance. But if you go to our page, it looks very similar, but it's the between utility assistance and housing assistance. So let me show you. I will share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So hopefully you can see my screen right now. So you should be seeing the neighborhood housing, but see here has utility assistance only. So if someone's applying, all they need is utility, here's the link. And so here's Department of Human Services, utility assistance. And if you need housing, you toggle back. Here's NHSD and our EHAP program.
Okay, because I was going to say, this is the very screen that I've had people to fill out, and it was only at that moment that it says Department of Human Services, because honestly, it was all the same thing to me. So I didn't know that it said Department of Human Services up there. So people are still thinking, though, that they're applying with you all, but it's actually the DHS.
Correct. And so it toggles. Again, it's very similar. Here we ask what they're seeking, and if they select utility assistance only, we toggle them back to the utility assistance from DHS.
Okay.
If they still, for some reason, still go through, we do refer them back, not just to the DHS utility assistance, but those other programs as well.
Okay, and my last follow-up, just for clarity, if they do receive a denial, it does say in the denial to contact 311 to appeal?
I don't believe it says.
Because I didn't see that in someone's email. They just received the denial that they've already gotten assistance. That was it.
I don't believe the language says that, but people do call to ask why they were denied. We read them the reason out. And after, if someone is over income, doesn't matter if they file an appeal, we're still going to deny it because they're over income. So when they call to inquire why they were denied, and usually we put the reason they were denied. So when they call back is when we give them the information, and then that's when we can share the appeal information. Because honestly, I don't want to get appeals for all the over income denials that we get, because that's a waste of staff resources when we could be processing applications and getting rent payments to those that do meet the eligibility criteria more quickly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission that I may address?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience with us today as we work through these technical difficulties. And with that, we will close our meeting and look forward to seeing you all next time, hopefully in person. We'll see. Thank you. Y'all have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you to the staff. You did a great job. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.